Syracuse football has the easiest schedule in the country next season. Can they parlay that into a trip to the college football playoff?
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. On today's show, we are going over Syracuse football's overall schedule takeaways and whether or not the Cuse can parlay that into a trip to the college football playoff. We're going to talk about the fact that there are 2 bye weeks on the schedule, the fact that the teams they're playing are pretty much manageable for the most part, and the defining stretch for the Orange next season. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So before we get into the overall schedule takeaways and the possible trip to the college football playoff, maybe, here is the schedule for the Cuse. I'm going to leave a link in the description below in case you're not aware of it. I'll just go through the teams in order that they are playing. Starting off with Ohio, then you got Georgia Tech, then Stanford, Holy Cross, then their first road game is at UNLV, at NC State, at Pitt, Virginia Tech at home, at Boston College, at California, UConn at home, and then Miami at home to close the regular season. That is the schedule for Syracuse. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the fact that the Orange have 2 bye weeks on their schedule, just like every other team in the FBS this season and for next season as well. I read that. It's because of the fact that Labor Day falls a little bit later than usual. And so there are more Saturdays than usual to play games. I believe it's 14 Saturdays for 12 college football games in the regular season. So therefore, every single team has 2 bye weeks. That's what you really need to know. Every single team has at least 2 bye weeks. The ones that have 3 are the ones that are going to be playing in week 0, which does not apply to Syracuse. So the Orange have 2 bye weeks. Those 2 bye weeks are going to come between Georgia Tech and Stanford, so that'll be in mid-September. And then the next one is between at NC State and at Pitt, which is in mid-October. So once again, the Cuse, just like every other team, have 2 bye weeks on the schedule. Here is why it is important for Syracuse in particular, and why the Cuse can maybe use this advantage to squeak into the college football playoff. It allows for more recovery time. And you might be asking, you might be saying how, that applies to every other team, right? Because every team has 2. This is why it matters for Syracuse. The last few seasons, the Orange start off fast. They start well. They're winning games, 4-0 in back-to-back seasons for the first time ever. And then we get to the midseason point, and then the later stages of the regular season, injuries start happening. Injuries are always going to happen in football. Every single team deals with injuries. It's not just Syracuse. That's why I don't usually use injury as an excuse, because every team deals with injuries. But when it comes to Syracuse, they deal with injuries, and they typically lack the depth to be able to overcome those injuries. And so Syracuse starts losing games. Of course, part of it's because usually they're playing against tougher competition, but when you don't have your top-end talent against the better competition, it makes it harder to win. Syracuse in past seasons, I genuinely believe this, their top-end talent has been relatively good. Like, it's not on the level of a Georgia or an Alabama or a Clemson or a Florida State for that matter. It's not on the level of those teams, but it's not like Syracuse has had nobody. They've had some NFL draft picks on their teams. They've gotten guys that have made All-American teams, all conference selections. It's not like Syracuse is devoid of top end talent. Yes, they don't have the top end talent that can put them in the national championship conversation, but they do have the top end talent typically where you could see them winning 8 games in the regular season. That's what it's been the last couple of years. You're like, yeah, they could if everything breaks their way. The problem is that typically not everything's going to break your way. So you're going to start getting into the backups and the third stringers. And Syracuse's backups and third stringers are typically not as strong as other teams' backups and third stringers. That's usually what has happened with Syracuse over the past few seasons. So the fact that there are 2 bye weeks, it allows for the players that do have bumps and bruises or are dealing with injuries and are missing time to be able to recruit their bodies for 1 extra week. Everyone gets 1 extra week, but for Syracuse, it matters so much because they really, really need their top end talent if they are going to be successful, if they are going to be a dark horse for the college football playoff next season. So having 2 bye weeks, incredibly important for Syracuse. Not as important as it is for a school like Clemson or Florida State because, yeah, their backups and their backups are better than a lot of teams' first stringers. So it's really not going to matter as much for them, unless, of course, until they get to the real games that matter for them, which is if they get to the college football playoff, the conference championship game. Syracuse isn't on that level yet. We're hoping to get to that level, but when it comes to other teams in the conference, this matters for Syracuse because we want to be a dark horse into the playoff. We're going to need our top end stars to be healthy. Having that extra bye week to recover is going to help Syracuse. So that's it for the 2 bye weeks and why I think it's really strong for Syracuse next season, why it's a good thing. Now coming up, the schedule, as I said, it's the easiest in the country according to ESPN. That means the teams they're playing are pretty manageable. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. On today's show, we are going over Syracuse football's overall schedule takeaways and whether or not they can parlay that into the college football playoff next season. Some have already called Syracuse a dark horse to make it. And, well, the fact that there are 2 bye weeks, as we discussed earlier, certainly helps Syracuse, maybe more so than any other team, because they need their top-end talent to be healthy in order to have a chance at making the college football playoff. Like, can they make a bowl game if some of their stars get hurt? Absolutely they can. They've done it the past couple of seasons. But if you're going to make it into the top 12, you need your horses to be healthy. Now it's time to talk about the manageable schedule that Syracuse football has next season. I wouldn't call it easy, but at the same time, ESPN Index called it the easiest schedule in the Power Four for Syracuse next season. And that's why I talked about a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, why some experts are calling Syracuse football a dark horse to make the college football playoff. For starters, discussed this yesterday, there's obviously no Clemson on the schedule, right? There's no Florida State on the schedule, and there's no Drake May caliber quarterback on the schedule. If Syracuse had to play one of those teams, we would probably say that is a loss for the Orange. Well, last year, they had to play all three of them. They had to play Clemson, they had to play Florida State, and they had to play against Drake May. They weren't winning any of those games. They didn't even have a prayer's chance at winning those games. They really didn't. Maybe Clemson, honestly, the one at home was the only game where Syracuse might have had a chance because obviously the Orange started 4-0. They had a lot of momentum. Clemson took themselves out of college football playoff conversation pretty early. Back then, it was only 4 teams. Obviously, this year it's 12, but they were 2-2 to start the year. So we thought Syracuse might have had a chance in that one. But Garrett Schrader's fumble in the first couple of plays of the game, it pretty much set the tone, and Syracuse didn't really have a chance to win after that. This season, they don't have to deal with it. They don't. Now, regarding the Drake May caliber quarterback, maybe Cam Ward has a crazy year for Miami. That's certainly possible. I don't want to discount him by any means. I think he's the best quarterback in the conference, but I don't think he's on Drake May's level right now. Like last season when we saw North Carolina on the schedule, we knew that Drake May was pretty much a consensus top 5 quarterback in the country. Actually, really, it was a top 5 player in the country, let alone quarterbacks, right? It's the main reason why Syracuse could have a chance at making the college football playoff, why their over-under is higher than in recent years at 7.5 wins. Their non-conference schedule is also a joke. Now, spoiler for Poll Friday, which is tomorrow at 6 p.m., it's a joke. Their non-conference schedule, if they don't go 3-1, it's pretty much a disaster for this team. You have to go against 3-1. Their non-conference schedule, Ohio at home, that's a win. Holy Cross at home, that better be a win. At UNLV, all right, that's the tough one. That's the tough one. Like, that is the toughest game in the non-con. UNLV. UNLV, historic football power UNLV. I understand it's not going to be an easy game. They're going on the road. It's in Vegas. I understand, and they can lose that game. But the point being is that if that is your toughest non-conference game, you have a really, really easy non-conference schedule. And the final non-conference game is in the second last week of the regular season. They're playing UConn. They're playing UConn football. Not UConn basketball. If Syracuse had to play UConn basketball, it's over. Like they would not beat UConn, all right? They're not on that level yet if we're talking about basketball. But football, we might as well be UConn basketball to them. Do you understand that? Like, Syracuse football is head and shoulders better than UConn football. So you better win that game at home. The Orange should also start the season fast like they have in recent years. I have said repeatedly that Georgia Tech is the game in week 2 that is going to set the tone for the regular season. I don't think it's the defining stretch. We'll talk about that later in the podcast. Georgia Tech at home, week 2, is the game that sets the tone. And I think Syracuse is going to win that game. I know it's June 27th at the time of this recording. There's still a long ways away. We're still a couple months away, but I believe Syracuse football is going to beat Georgia Tech in week 2. And then if you look at the rest of the 4 games, right, you got Ohio to start the season. That's going to be a win in all likelihood. You got Stanford after Georgia Tech. You're probably going to beat Stanford at home. And then week 4, you got Holy Cross. That's definitely a win. So once again, I am expecting Syracuse to start 4-0. That would be for the 3rd time in this program, or 3rd straight year that Syracuse starts 4-0. Last year was already the first time they ever started 4-0 in back-to-back seasons. So this will be the first time in first time in program history they start 4-0 in 3 consecutive seasons. It's a manageable schedule. You can easily see the upside of 10 wins. You can see it. It's there. Do I think they're going to win 10 games? I don't, because I think you need basically everything to break your way. But at the same time, the downside is significantly higher than it has been in years past. Like the past couple of seasons, Syracuse football's downside was not be in a bowl game, right? Win 5 games. Win 4 or 5 games. That was the downside in the past few years. This year, I would say if they don't make a bowl game, that would be a disastrous season. 6-6 would feel disappointing, but they would still qualify for a bowl. But I think that is the low end for this team at 6-6. The high end is 10-2. I don't see them getting 11 plus. I think that's a little bit unrealistic, especially in Fran Brown's first year. But when you look at their manageable schedule, it's a main reason why people are thinking that Syracuse football could be a playoff team next season. There's 12 playoff teams. That's kind of important. Winning 10 games, it's possible. I don't think it'll happen, but certainly possible. And one of the reasons why people think Syracuse could make the college football playoff. Now, coming up, what is the defining stretch of the season for Syracuse, and what is the path for the Orange to make the playoff using precedent from recent years? I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop, but as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And hey, if you're itching for Syracuse football, just like I am, well, guess what? FanDuel has released the odds for Syracuse's first game against Ohio, which the Orange are heavily favored to win. And part of the reason why I think that Syracuse is going to win that game, because Vegas isn't typically wrong. The Orange are 15.5-point favorites to get the W. You think the Orange can cover? Well, bet it right now on FanDuel. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Day now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. On today's show, we are going over Syracuse football's overall schedule takeaways, and can Syracuse football parlay that into the college football playoff? 2 bye weeks is certainly going to help. The fact that they have a manageable schedule is also definitely one of the reasons why people think they can make the college football playoff. Now it's time to talk about the defining stretch, and then we're going to get to, using past precedent, what does Syracuse realistically have to do to have a chance? Obviously, this is the first year of having 12 teams in the playoff, but looking at last year, the path is not easy to make it, particularly for ACC teams. But let's get into the defining stretch of the year. October 4th to November 16th, Syracuse football will play 6 games in that stretch. 5 of those 6 will be on the road. Those games are at UNLV, at NC State, bye week, at Pitt, Virginia Tech, at Boston College, at California. I'll repeat the defining stretch for you. At UNLV, at NC State, bye week, at Pitt, Virginia Tech at home, at Boston College, at California. Once again, that's from October 4th to November 16th. The defining stretch for Syracuse football next season. I am honestly a little bit surprised that the ACC didn't schedule it so that Cal and UNLV would be in back-to-back weeks. So therefore, Syracuse is going to have to travel to the West Coast twice. They're going to have to do it twice. Such is life. We're all going to have to get through it together. It's not an excuse. I'm just kind of surprised that they didn't put them in back-to-back weeks. I just wanted to point that out. It would make a lot of sense, but this is the 21st century. We got airplanes. I've made that joke long enough if you've been listening. I've talked about how Georgia Tech will set the tone. I said that last segment as well. But these 6 games are going to make or break Syracuse's schedule. We've talked about at UNLV and at NC State, right? We've talked about those teams, Both were bowl teams last year, plenty of returning players, returning coaches. If you go 1-1 in that stretch, if you can beat UNLV and or NC State, that is really, really good for Syracuse football if they want to make a bowl game that's a really highly regarded bowl game or possibly the college football playoff, right? Those games are really important. You got to at least split them. Pitt is one of those teams that's looking for a rebound season. They were 3-9 last year. They had been pretty good in years past, but 3-9 last year. They should be a little bit better now that they have a new quarterback, first-year starter Nate Yarnell, instead of Phil Dracovic, who is the worst quarterback in the country. He sucks. He's terrible. I hate him. Boston College is not going to be a gimme, particularly because Bill O'Brien is now there. You can make fun of him all you want, how he was as a general manager in Houston. He was awful. But in terms of him being a football coach, he's actually pretty decent. He's got a pretty good track record. And so playing Boston College, particularly on the road, is not going to be an easy game for Syracuse next year, although I don't trust their quarterback, Thomas Castellanos. And then at Cal, again, a West Coast team to close out the trip. It's the end of the stretch, right? Bowl team last season. And you have to go on the West Coast again. That is the defining stretch of the year. If Syracuse football can manage a 4-2 record, then you could be looking at a 9-10 win season. If they can go 4-2 in that stretch, you're looking at 9-10 wins. Anything lower, you're starting to talk about 6-8 wins. It's a tough one. It's tough. But in order for Syracuse to have a chance at making the ACC championship game, they're probably going to have to win 9-10 games in the regular season, which, by the way, Syracuse has never made before. That stretch could very well determine if Syracuse is playing in the ACC championship or if Syracuse has a chance at making the college football playoff. It's that stretch right there. Now let's talk about actually making the playoff. What are the feasible things that Syracuse is going to have to do? They are probably going to need 10 wins in the regular season. They're probably going to win 10, minimum 9, not win 10. They probably have to get at least 9 wins, but really it's at least 10. So 9 is the minimum, 10 is like the expectation if you want to make the college football playoff. And the reasoning for that is because you probably need 10 to make the ACC championship game. And then, of course, if you win the conference championship game, that's an auto bid. So Syracuse, it doesn't matter how many games they win. If they get to the ACC championship game, which again is probably going to require at least 10 wins, if they win that game, they're in the college football playoff no matter what. But if they lose that game, they're in trouble if they only have 10 wins. If they only have 9 wins and they lose in the ACC championship game, they're done. If they win 10 games in the regular season, lose in the ACC, maybe, but it is unlikely. It's unlikely if they are 10-3 without that ACC championship win that they get in. And here's why. First of all, 4 automatic qualifiers because of all the teams that can win the Power 4, right? If you win a Power 4 conference, you get an automatic bid to the college football playoff. Okay, so that's 4 teams. Then the highest ranked group of 5 team gets into the college football playoff. So in total, there are 5 automatic spots. So there's only 7 at-large teams that are going to be allowed. And I look at it last season, the top 12 teams all had at least 10 wins, and that was not including a group of 5 team in there. So you have to have at least 10. And then, of course, the fact that Syracuse is an ACC team hurts them severely hurts them. Right? Last year, there was a 10-win team that fit the category of they won 10 games in the regular season, lost in the ACC championship game. Do you remember that team? I'll give you 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. If you guessed Louisville, you would be correct. Louisville had a 10-2 regular season last year, lost in the ACC title game to Florida State. They were 10-3. And under the new format of 12 teams, they would not have gotten in. They were ranked 15th in the final playoff rankings last year. That's not good for Syracuse. It's not good for really any ACC team unless, of course, you're Clemson or Florida State. And it's because the ACC is not held in the same light as the Big Ten or the SEC. These arguments are going to happen, and I would hope that Syracuse is in the argument because that would be pretty fun. But the reality is the ACC is not the same level as the SEC or the upper teams in the Big Ten. So those teams, they get priority over a school like Syracuse. Now, one day, hopefully Syracuse can change that reputation, but that's how it is for now. Louisville, a 10-2 team, loses in the ACC title game. They end up 10-3. They don't even crack the top 12. They were 15th. So what does that mean for Syracuse? You're going to have to win 11 games in all likelihood. You're going to have to win 11. I think if you win 11, you're in. So if you go 11-1 in the regular season, you lose in the ACC title game, or you go 10-2, I guess if you win the ACC title game, you're automatically in. But the point being is that short of winning the conference, this team is going to have to win 11 games next year, regular season, postseason, whatever it is. They're going to have to win 11 games. Hopefully they can do it. I don't see it necessarily. I don't think they're going to have an 11-1 regular season or win the ACC. But hopefully at some point during the regular season, this team is in the conversation. A couple years ago, they were ranked 14th in the country at the midway point. After 6 weeks, they were 14th, and they had to go on the road to play Clemson. I hope that Syracuse next year is in a similar boat where they're 6-0 and they're ranked 14th in the country. I think that would be really cool because then you could start talking about, hey, 12 teams down in the playoff, they're ranked 14th. They're not far away from it, right? They keep stacking up the wins. But realistically, it's going to be very challenging given the reputation of the ACC and the reputation of Syracuse for the Orange to make the college football playoffs. So that is it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, tell all your friends and subscribe to the channel. Turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. Tomorrow, we got Poll Friday. How many wins for Syracuse football in their non-conference slate? I already basically gave you the answer. It's going to be 3 or 4, but what did you guys have to say about that? So we'll go over that tomorrow at 6 p.m. Everyone, have a great rest of your evening.